Hello everybody, welcome to the Chinese Civilization channel. My name is Timothy and I want to welcome all of you who are Chinese civilization enthusiasts. Today we are delving into the Shang Dynasty, which is the first historical dynasty of China. And some of you are going to say, hang on, we just did the Xia dynasty. Wasn't that the first dynasty of China? Well, to that I have to say yes. But while the Xia dynasty is traditionally regarded as the first dynasty of China, historians today make a careful distinction between tradition and evidence. The Xia is known primarily through ancient texts like the Book of Documents and the record of the Grand Historians. But there is no direct archaeological evidence that confirms the existence of the Xia as a historical dynasty. It is true that there are excavations such as at Epilogue that correspond to the period of the Xia dynasty, but without written record explicitly identifying it as such, the Xia remains as semi-legendary. In contrast, the Shang dynasty is the first dynasty in Chinese history confirmed by both ancient written records and archaeological discoveries. The breakthrough came with the unearthing of oracle bones at Yinxu, the last Shang capital near modern Anyang. These bones bear inscriptions that align with names, rituals, and events recorded in traditional texts, providing a direct link between archaeology and historiography. Because of this convergence of textual tradition and material resources, historians consider the Shang as the first historical dynasty of China, a state we can verify through multiple lines of inquiry. And so, with that said, the Shang is regarded as the first historical dynasty, whereas the Xia is considered by tradition as the first dynasty of China. And if you're ready, let's now dive into our story on the Shang Dynasty. Prologue. Long before the grandeur of the Qing or the glory of the Han, there was a Shang, a civilization veiled in myth, then uncovered by fire and bone. For centuries, the Shang dynasty existed only in the pages of ancient chronicles, dismissed by skeptics as legend. But buried beneath the earth of central China, the truth waited patiently. Fragments of tortoiseshell and ox scapulae inscribed with characters from a forgotten age, scattered bronzes bearing the marks of master craftsmen, the ruins of palaces and tombs belonging to kings once thought imaginary. It was a discovery that rewrote Chinese history. The Shang dynasty, ruling from 1600 BCE to 1046 BCE, was the first dynasty in Chinese history for which we have firm archaeological evidence. It was a world ruled by powerful kings who claimed the mandate of heaven, not through philosophy, but through blood rituals and divine communion. The Shang kings divined the future by cracking bones in fire, poured wine into sacred bronze vessels for their ancestors, and led armies onto smoky battlefields against rebellious tribes. This was an age where religion and rulership were inseparable, where the elite dined off ritual vessels, and the common folk toiled in fields they did not own, where writing was born not for poetry or story, but to speak with the spirits, and where the fate of the people could hinge on the reading of a single cracked line scotched across a turtle shell. In this video, we journey back to the 2nd millennium BCE to explore the Shang dynasty, China's first historical dynasty. From its legendary founding to its dramatic fall, from the dazzling Bronze Age technology to the spiritual world of ancestors and gods, we will uncover the world of the Shang, a civilization both alien and familiar, ancient yet foundational. The past is not silent. It speaks if we know how to listen. Chapter 1: From Legend to History. For centuries, the Shang Dynasty lived in the shadow of doubt. Its name appeared in ancient texts, revered by Confucian scholars, listed in dynastic chronicles, and remembered as the successor of the Xia. Yet to many modern historians of the 19th and early 20th centuries, the Shang was a myth, no more real than the Yellow Emperor or the dragons that once flew across the sky. That began to change in the most unlikely of ways, with the discovery of dragon bones. In the late 1800s, Chinese herbalists were grinding up strange inscribed bones for use in traditional medicine. These so-called dragon bones, sold at apothecaries, were in fact oracle bones, tortoise shells and ox scapulae inscribed with ancient script. The characters carved into them would soon become the key to unlocking a lost civilization. By the 1920s, archaeologists traced the source of these bones to Yinxu, the ruins of the last Shang capital near modern-day Anyang in Henan province. What they unearthed there was astonishing. Palaces, workshops, royal tombs, and tens of thousands of oracle bones bearing names of kings, records of sacrifices, and queries to the divine. The inscriptions matched the historical accounts found in texts, like the record of the Grand Historian, providing a firm bridge between legend and verifiable history. This convergence of archaeology and ancient writing marks a turning point. While the Xia dynasty remains elusive, known only through literary tradition, the Shang dynasty stands on solid historical ground. It is the first Chinese dynasty confirmed by both archaeological remains and written records from the period itself. The Shang kings were no longer just names in dusty books. They were real rulers who built cities, led armies, made offerings to ancestors, and recorded their fears, hopes, and triumphs on bone and shell. Through these silent witnesses of the past, the Shang emerged from myth into history. This is why historians today call the Shang the first historical dynasty of China, the first for which the past can speak for itself. Chapter 2: The Founding of the Shang. The story of the Shang dynasty begins with a visionary leader named Chen Tang, known to history simply as Tang of Shang. He was not born into kingship. Rather, he was a chieftain of a powerful tribe that lived under the shadows of the Xia dynasty, which had ruled the Central Plains for generations. But as the Xia declined into corruption and cruelty under its last ruler, King Jie, Tang rose to meet the moment. Traditional accounts describe King Jie as a tyrant who indulged in excess and punished dissent with brutal force. The people suffered under his rule, and the mandate of heaven, the ancient belief that heaven granted kings the right to rule based on virtue, was believed to have been lost. Sensing opportunity, Tang forged alliances with neighboring tribes, slowly weakening the Xia's hold. He was aided by wise advisors like Yi Ying, a former slave whose intellect and diplomacy became legendary. Around 1600 BCE, after years of careful maneuvering, Tang led a coalition of rebel forces against the Xia. The decisive confrontation came at the Battle of Mingtiao. As torrential rain lashed the battlefields, Tang's troops defeated Jie's army, bringing the Xia dynasty to an end. Jie fled south and eventually died in exile. With his victory, Tang established a new order and proclaimed the founding of the Shang Dynasty. Tang is remembered not just as a conqueror, but as a moral ruler. Ancient texts portray him as a benevolent king who reduced taxes, eased the burdens of labor, and ruled with humility and restraint. He was said to have inscribed a warning on his bathing tub: "Be cautious, never forget the people's suffering." Whether these stories were embellished or not, they reflect an idealized vision of what a just ruler should be, a stark contrast to the tyranny of King Jie. With Tang's victory, a new dynasty was born, one that would endure for over 5 centuries and lay the foundation of Chinese civilization. The Shang had risen, and with them a new era began. Chapter 3: The Shang Kings and their Court. The Shang Dynasty was ruled by a powerful and deeply religious elite. At its head stood the king, not merely a political leader, but also the high priest of the realm. He was the one who communed with the ancestors, interpreted the will of heaven, and ensured that the cosmic order was maintained. In the Shang world, kingship was not just a throne, it was a sacred duty. Historical records and oracle bone inscriptions reveal a long line of Shang kings, beginning with Tang and ending with Di Xin, also known to legend as King Zhou of Shang. Over the centuries, at least 30 kings ruled the dynasty, passing the throne within the royal family across 17 generations. The Shang capital moved several times over the course of the dynasty, often following the lineage of ruling kings. These moves were more than political. They reflected changes in ritual centers, military needs, and cosmological alignment. It wasn't until the reign of Pang Geng, roughly 300 years after Tang's founding, that the Shang capital was moved to Yin, modern-day Anyang, where it remained until the end of the dynasty. This final capital would give the Shang their alternative name, the Ying Dynasty. The Shang court was a center of ceremony, divination, and power. Kings surrounded themselves with diviners, bronze casters, scribes, and military generals. Decisions of state, warfare, agriculture, hunting, weather were not made lightly. They were guided by elaborate rituals and messages from the spirit world, revealed through the cracks of heated bones. The royal family wielded immense authority, but power was also distributed among trusted relatives who governed territories and led troops. These noble lineages form a complex network of alliances and rivalries, loyal to the king, yet powerful in their own right. At the heart of the court lay a deep belief that the world was shaped by forces beyond the mortal realm, and only the king, through rituals and reverence, could maintain harmony between heaven, earth, and the ancestors. This was not simply ruled by might, it was ruled by mandate and mystery. Chapter 4: The capital at Yinxu. If the Shang dynasty left behind a heartbeat, it was at Yinxu, the ruins of Yin, its final and most magnificent capital. Located near modern-day Anyang in Henan province, Yinxu was not merely a city. It was a sacred landscape where the living ruled beside the dead, where kings communed with spirits, and where the foundations of Chinese civilization took lasting shape. The city flourished during the late Shang period, especially under King Wu-Ting, who ruled for over half a century. At its height, Yinxu was a sprawling urban center that covered over 30 square kilometers. It contained palaces, workshops, residential quarters, temples, and royal tombs, each laid out with impressive order and ceremonial precision. Excavations at Yinxu began in earnest in the 1920s and continued to this day. Among the most remarkable discoveries are the royal tombs, especially Tomb M5, which belonged to Fu Hao, a queen, priestess, and military general who commanded troops in battle. Her burial chamber, untouched by looters, revealed an astonishing collection of more than 1,600 burial items, including bronze ritual vessels, jade ornaments, ivory carvings, and weapons. Her tomb offered the world its first glimpse into the life of an elite Shang woman and the complexity of Shang ritual and warfare. Also found at Yinxu were the oracle bones that revolutionized our understanding of the Shang. These bones, buried in deep pits, recorded the concerns of the court: harvest, weather, childbirth, war, illness, and ancestral will. They are the earliest known form of Chinese writing and among the earliest writing systems in the world. Yinxu was more than a political capital. It was a spiritual center carefully aligned with cosmological beliefs. The layout of its temples and altars reflected a worldview in which heaven, earth, and the ancestors formed a sacred triangle with the king at the center. Today, Yinxu is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a testament to a dynasty once doubted, now confirmed in stone, bone, and bronze. In its ruins, we find the voice of China's first historical kings and the enduring symbols of their rule. Chapter 5: Oracle Bones and the Birth of Writing. Among the greatest legacies of the Shang Dynasty is the birth of Chinese writing, not as literature or law, but as a medium of divine communication. The earliest known form of Chinese script, called Oracle Bone Script, was carved into turtle shells and ox scapulae as part of elaborate rituals to seek guidance from the spirit world. The Shang believed that their ancestors and the gods could influence events in the living world. To access this supernatural insight, royal diviners performed ceremonies known as pyro-osteomancy. They would address matters of war, agriculture, childbirth, weather, illness, hunting, and even dreams. The bones were then heated with metal rods until they cracked. The patterns of the cracks were interpreted by diviners, and the results, along with the original questions and often the dates, were inscribed beside them. These inscriptions form the earliest known corpus of Chinese characters, many of which can still be recognized in their modern form. Words like Re, sun, Yue, moon, Sui, water, and Wang, king, appear frequently. The structure of the writing reveals a sophisticated system, complete with grammar, naming conventions, and a calendar, already in use over 3,000 years ago. Most of the oracle bones recovered to date come from the capital at Yinxu, especially during the reign of King Wu Ting, whose name appears frequently in the inscriptions. His queen, Fu Hao, also featured prominently, offering rare insight into the life of a powerful woman in ancient China. Beyond their linguistic significance, the oracle bones provide a window into Shang society, government, religion, and psychology. They show us what the kings feared, what they hoped for, and how they governed, with heaven and the ancestors always looking on. In many civilizations, writing began with trade or administration. In China, it began with reverence and awe, with questions whispered to the divine and answers written in the bones. Chapter 6: A World of Spirits and Ancestors. To understand the Shang Dynasty, one must step into a world where the veil between the living and the dead was paper thin. In the Shang worldview, life did not end with death, it transformed. The spirits of ancestors continued to exist, active and potent, capable of blessing or cursing their descendants. It was the duty of the living, especially the king, to maintain harmony between this world and the next. At the heart of Shang religion was ancestor worship. The Shang kings traced their lineage through a divine royal line, and their authority was rooted in their exclusive ability to commune with the ancestral spirits. This connection was not symbolic, it was believed to be real, direct, and essential for the survival of the state. Every major decision, whether to go to war, sow crops, or conduct a royal marriage, required the consent of the ancestors. Through oracle bone divination, the king or his diviners posed questions to the spirits, interpreting the cracks in heated bones as responses from the other world. Rituals were then performed to appease or thank these spirits, often involving the offering of food, wine, jade, and sometimes human or animal sacrifice. The Shang pantheon also included high gods such as Ti, the supreme deity, and nature spirits tied to rivers, mountains, wind, and rain. But it was the ancestors who were closest and most intimately involved in daily affairs. Royal tombs were constructed as eternal homes for these spirits, complete with lavish goods, bronze vessels, weapons, and even sacrificial victims to serve the deceased in the afterlife. Bronze ritual vessels, inscribed with dedications to ancestors, were central to these rites. They were used in ceremonial feasts during which the living and dead symbolically dined together. These vessels, both sacred objects and works of art, are among the most iconic artifacts of the Shang. To the Shang, the ancestors were not a memory, they were a presence. In their temples, tombs, and altars, the dead still walk and watch. Chapter 7: Mastery in Bronze. If the oracle bones reveal the mind of the Shang, the bronzes reveal their soul. In the Bronze Age world of the Shang Dynasty, bronze was more than a metal, it was a material of power, ritual, and identity. Nowhere else in the ancient world did bronze take on such monumental and spiritual significance as it did in Shang China. The Shang people developed a highly advanced bronze casting tradition far ahead of many of their contemporaries. Their artisans mastered the piece mold casting technique, which allowed for intricate designs and large-scale production. This method involved creating a model of the vessel in clay, pressing molds around it, carving decorative patterns into the inner surfaces, and then pouring molten bronze into the assembled mold. The result was a durable, beautifully decorated vessel, each one unique. These bronzes were not made for everyday use. They were ritual vessels imbued with spiritual power. Used during ancestral worship ceremonies, they held offerings of food and wine meant to nourish the spirits of the dead. The most iconic types included the Ting, a tripod cauldron symbolizing authority, the gu, a tall wine cup, and the zhen, a wide-mouthed vessel often shaped like animals or mythical beasts, decorated with complex motifs such as Tao Tie, a mysterious mask-like design believed to represent supernatural beings. The vessels carried a coded visual language that spoke to the Shang worldview. Some bronzes also bore inscriptions dedicating the piece to a specific ancestor or commemorating a notable event. These inscriptions, though often short, give us valuable clues about Shang politics, religion, and kinship. The production of bronze required large quantities of copper, tin, and labor. Only the ruling elite could afford such elaborate ritualware, and the control of bronze technology was a marker of political and religious dominance. Workshops near Yinxu revealed the bronze casting was a highly organized industry supported by specialists in metallurgy, mining, transportation, and artistry. In bronze, the Shang left behind not just relics but voices, silent, heavy, and enduring. These vessels were made to speak to the ancestors, but today they speak to us as well of a civilization that wielded fire, clay, and metal to reach beyond the mortal realm. Chapter 8: Life in Shang Society. Beneath the grandeur of palaces and the solemnity of bronze rituals, the Shang Dynasty was home to a complex and hierarchical society. It was a civilization built not only by kings and diviners, but also by farmers, artisans, warriors, and slaves, each playing a role in sustaining the world of Shang rule. At the top of the social pyramid stood the royal family, followed by an elite class of nobles and ritual specialists. These aristocrats controlled large estates and were often relatives of the king. They governed the outer regions of Shang territory, commanded troops, and conducted local religious ceremonies. Their loyalty was essential to maintaining dynastic stability. Just below the nobility were the craftsmen, skilled artisans who worked in bronze casting, jade carving, pottery, and bone inscription. Many of these craftspeople live in designated workshops near the capital, producing the tools, weapons, and ritual items that sustain both daily life and royal ceremony. Their work was specialized and often hereditary, passed down through generations of families. The farmers, who formed the backbone of Shang society, lived in rural settlements and were responsible for growing millet, wheat, rice, and barley. They also raised livestock such as pigs, dogs, cattle, and chickens. Though often taxed heavily and obligated to provide labor to the state, farmers were vital to the economy and to the provision of food for both people and sacrificial offerings. At the bottom of society were the slaves and war captives, many of whom were forced into labor or used in ritual sacrifice. Human sacrifice was a grim but integral part of Shang religious life, believed to serve the ancestors in the afterlife or to consecrate tombs and temples. Oracle bone inscriptions confirm the names and origins of war prisoners who were offered in such rites. Women in Shang society held various roles. While most lived within the domestic sphere, elite women such as Fu Hao served as military generals, priestesses, and landowners. Her example shows that women of high rank could wield substantial influence even in a patriarchal system. Shang society was deeply stratified but tightly interwoven. Ritual, labor, and lineage were the threads that bound it together, each person part of a cosmic order that stretched from the fields of earth to the halls of the ancestors. Chapter 9. The Shang and the Barbarians. Though the Shang Dynasty ruled the heart of the Central Plains, it was not alone. All around its borders lived a mosaic of non-Shang peoples, tribes, clans, and cultures the Shang referred to collectively as the Fang or regions. To the Shang elites, these outsiders were often labeled Yi or barbarians, not necessarily as an ethnic slur, but as a way of distinguishing between us and them. The Shang world was surrounded by peripheral peoples with their own traditions, languages, and beliefs. Some lived peacefully under Shang influence, paying tribute or serving as vassals. Others were enemies, raided in seasonal campaigns or targeted for conquest. The oracle bones speak of frequent conflicts with named enemies such as the Qiang in the west, the Ren Fang in the south, and the Tu Fang to the east. But these campaigns were not merely about land or power, they were also religious. War captives were often sacrificed in ancestral rituals, their blood serving as offerings to strengthen the realm's connection with heaven. Thus, warfare had both political and spiritual dimensions. Yet, the relationship between the Shang and its neighbors was not only defined by violence. Cultural exchange was constant. Archaeological finds show that Shang bronze vessels, jade objects, and weapons made their way into the hands of surrounding groups, while Shang tombs contained goods made in the styles of other peoples. Marriages and alliances were also common tools of diplomacy. It is likely that many of these so-called barbarian groups influenced the Shang as much as they were influenced in return. Recent excavations have revealed vibrant regional cultures that coexisted with the Shang, some with their own bronze traditions, burial practices, and even early forms of writing. The Shang worldview divided the cosmos into order and chaos, center and periphery, civilization and wilderness. But in truth, the line was more porous than they admitted. The Shang court stood at the center, but its power radiated outward through a network of conflict, cooperation, and cultural flow. Even in its strength, the Shang dynasty was never alone. It ruled within a larger tapestry of early Chinese cultures, some friends, some foes, all shaping the history to come. Chapter 10. The Decline of the Shang. The Shang dynasty reached its peak under rulers like Wu Ting, but no dynasty lasts forever. In time, the Shang's divine mandate began to fray. The once revered rituals became rigid formalities. The ancestral connection weakened, and the final ruler of the dynasty would be remembered not for glory, but for ruin. The last king of the Shang was Tixin, known in later legend as King Zhou of Shang, a name synonymous in Chinese culture with decadence and tyranny. While some modern historians question the full accuracy of his portrayal, traditional sources depict Tixin as a ruler who indulged in luxury, cruelty, and vice, abandoning the moral order that had once legitimized Shang rule. According to these accounts, Tixin constructed the infamous lake of wine and forest of meat, a vast pool filled with wine and hung with roasted meat for his endless feast. You might recall in our video about the Xia dynasty, we also mentioned a similar tale involving King Jie of Xia and his own lake of wine and forest of meat. This is not an error, but a deliberate echo in the traditional sources, highlighting how the last rulers of both the Xia and Shang dynasties were remembered for their excesses, each marking the moral decay that led to their downfall. He was said to be under the influence of his favored consort, the beautiful and ruthless Taji, whose alleged sadism shocked later generations. Together, they are accused of devising tortures such as the bronze toaster, in which victims were forced to walk on a red-hot bronze cylinder, often to their deaths. Whether legend or fact, these stories reflect the perception that the Shang had lost the mandate of heaven, the divine right to rule. Natural disasters, crop failures, and mounting rebellion were interpreted as signs that heaven had turned its favor elsewhere. Meanwhile, a rising power was gathering strength in the west. The Zhou people, originally vassals to the Shang, had grown increasingly powerful under the leadership of King Wen and his son King Wu. Alarmed by the Shang's decline, they united other tribes under their banner and prepared for war. The stage was set for a reckoning. The mighty Shang, once unshakable, stood teetering on the edge of collapse, undone not only by external enemies but by the excesses of its own court. The final battle would not just mark the fall of a king, but the end of China's first historical dynasty. Chapter 11: The Rise of the Zhou. As the Shang dynasty descended into decadence, a new power quietly gathered strength to the west. The Zhou people, settled in the Wei River Valley in what is now Shanxi province, were originally vassals of the Shang. But under the leadership of visionary rulers, they would rise to challenge their masters and reshape the future of China. The Zhou lineage claimed descent from the legendary Ho Chi, a cultural hero credited with teaching agriculture. Their society was built on strict kingship ties, military discipline, and a belief in moral governance. When the Shang court grew corrupt, many smaller tribes and lords looked to the Zhou for leadership. It was King Wen of Zhou who first laid the ideological groundwork for rebellion. Though held as a prisoner at the Shang court for a time, he eventually returned to his homeland and began building alliances, strengthening his army, and preparing for the fall of the Shang. But it was his son, King Wu of Zhou, who would strike the decisive blow. In around 1046 BCE, King Wu led a coalition of Zhou and allied forces eastward toward the Shang heartland. At the Battle of Muyue, near the Shang capital of Yin, the Zhou army met the forces of King Zhou of Shang. I should point out here that the Zhou in King Wu of Zhou and Zhou in King Zhou of Shang are two different Chinese characters that might look similar when romanized without the diacritic marks. Well, anyway, according to later chronicles, many of the Shang troops, disillusioned and demoralized, defeated mid-battle and refused to fight. The Zhou forces quickly overwhelmed them. King Zhou, realizing his fate was sealed, retreated to his palace and set it ablaze, taking his own life in the flames. With his death, the Shang dynasty came to an end after nearly 550 years of rule. King Wu established the Zhou dynasty and declared that heavens had withdrawn its mandate from the corrupt Shang and bestowed it upon the virtuous Zhou. Thus was born the enduring Chinese concept of the mandate of heaven, the idea that dynastic legitimacy is tied to moral righteousness and divine approval. The Zhou victory was not just a military conquest, it was a transformation of ideology. The torch of civilization had passed from Shang to Zhou, but the legacy of the Shang would endure in ritual, art, and memory. Chapter 12: Legacy of the Shang Dynasty. Though the Shang Dynasty fell more than 3,000 years ago, its imprint on Chinese civilization remains profound. As the first dynasty confirmed by both archaeological evidence and historical tradition, the Shang represents the beginning of recorded Chinese history and the foundation on which all later dynasties would build. One of the Shang's most enduring contributions is the Chinese writing system. The oracle bone script, etched into turtle shells and ox scapulae, marks the earliest known form of Chinese characters. While these early symbols were simple and stylized, they evolved directly into the complex writing system still in use today. In that sense, every Chinese character written today carries echoes of the Shang. Culturally, the Shang laid the groundwork for Chinese rituals and ancestor worship. Their elaborate bronze vessels and ceremonial practices reflected a worldview where the living and the dead remained closely linked, and where kings ruled not just by might, but through sacred rites. These beliefs were absorbed and adapted by the Zhou and continued to shape Chinese religion and philosophy for millennia. The bronze technology of the Shang was also unparalleled in its time. Their vessels, weapons, and ceremonial objects display not only technical mastery but artistic brilliance, with intricate design that reflect both aesthetic sensibility and spiritual symbolism. Today, these bronzes are considered national treasures and are housed in museums across China. In historical memory, the Shang also came to symbolize both cultural achievement and moral caution. Their fall, attributed to the excesses of King Zhou and his court, reinforces the belief that heaven would abandon unjust rulers. This idea of the mandate of heaven became central to Chinese political thought, influencing how dynasties justified their rule and explained their fall. Yet despite their reputation for decadence at the end, the Shang people were builders of cities, creators of systems, and pioneers of a cultural identity that would endure long after their dynasty collapsed. They gave shape to the Chinese worldview, where heaven, earth, and ancestors form a triad that bound society together. The Shang dynasty may have ended in fire and rebellion, but its spirit never vanished. Its legacy lives on in bronze and bone, in word and ritual, in the very DNA of Chinese civilization. Epilogue. From the midst of legend into the light of history, the Shang dynasty emerges as China's first fully historical civilization, leaving behind not only ruins and relics, but a legacy that shaped the very soul of Chinese identity. With cities of rammed earth, warriors of bronze, and divinations etched into bone, the Shang created a society that was advanced, organized, and deeply spiritual. Their world may seem distant, even alien, ruled by kings who spoke to ancestors and read the will of heaven in cracks of tortoise shells. And yet, the echoes of Shang still resound in modern Chinese culture, in the characters of written language, in the reverence for ancestors, in the bronze vessels preserved with awe. The Shang gave China its first voice, an audible, legible, and enduring record of civilization. As the Zhou rose and the Shang fell, a new chapter of history began. but it did not erase what came before. The Shang were remembered not only by later dynasties, but by generations of scholars and rulers who saw in them both a cultural origin and a moral lesson. They thought that greatness must be balanced by virtue and that heaven watches over the affairs of man. For us today, the Shang represent more than just the past. They represent the beginning of Chinese writing, the beginning of political order, the beginning of the long arc of dynasties that would rise and fall across the centuries. In honoring the Shang, we honored the roots of one of the world's oldest continuous civilizations. The Shang may be gone, but they are not forgotten. Their bones speak, their bronze sings, their spirit endures.